For much of its history, the arid continent of Ceradon, which lies to the south of Greater Aversyria, was a practitioner of and ruled by ritualism. The oldest continually practiced faith in the known world, ritualism is a religion which worships the 1001 steps of Sophocles, great stairway of limestone and brick which leads up to a massive and inert ancient tower. A tower we outside observers of the lore know was constructed by Ersonon in times long past, though this origin is of course unknown to its practitioners. However, interestingly, we do not know who constructed the steps of the tower itself, and so that remains a mystery to us. Ritualism is a widely fragmented faith, its practitioners famous for disagreeing on virtually every tenet, idea, or supposition of its other sects, of which there are many. However, they all agree that their faith is centered around the mythical journey of 7 pilgrims up the 1001 steps, where upon each step they faced a trial, and an angel taught them a lesson while assisting them with said trial. Hence, when you look at the symbol for ritualism, it is a book with wings, a nod to both the angel and their lessons. Given its ancient origin, it is not hard to imagine how ritualism dominated Ceradon, and was a core part of the empire of Ceradon's power structure. Though, by the 3rd century when our story takes place, this empire had become increasingly stagnant and ruled less by a central emperor and more by individual warlords. In the middle of the 3rd century, a man of soon-to-be great importance was born in the Ceradonian territory known simply as the Eastern Isle. There he would work as a merchant and local bureaucrat until he came to the attention of the Isle's warlord, Arrakis, who imprisoned him. Though the specifics of this imprisonment are debated by poets and scholars, most historians of both Wardenite and ritualist faith believe it was by unhappy happenstance. Arrakis, a man who frequently schemed for and went on military campaigns to win the empire of Ceradon's throne, governed a realm constantly on the brink of bankruptcy. It is suspected that Arrakis saw the successful young merchant and believed he could leverage his local political aspirations by promising influence for what were basically bribes to fund his excursions. The young merchant's refusal to pay said bribes then earned him a place in the darkest, deepest dungeon within the warlord's citadel on the Eastern Isle. Despite Arrakis' best efforts, however, the young merchant's money, which Arrakis planned to confiscate, could not be located by his forces. It is within this prison that the young merchant fades from this tale, and the First Warden steps into focus. For beneath this dark prison lurked a being of terrible power and malignant will, who attempted to pull the First Warden under its influence via his dreams. Yet the being could not foresee the power of the First Warden's will, who, rather than fall victim to its call, became resolute that he had witnessed a being of great and primordial evil. This would become a crucial moment in the writing of his as of yet unpenned works, known later as the Three Fathers. These books, which form the basis of the Wardenite faith, are, in order of their conception, Visions, Records of the Court, and the Book of Days, although this last one was likely transcribed by the First Warden's assistants given its broken, often stilted style. In brief summary, the first book lays down the core beliefs of the Wardenite faith, which I will discuss momentarily, and instructs the readers on how to live. The second is a record of cases presided over by the First Warden over the course of 5 years, and are a definitive guide on how to practice Wardenite law. The final is a labyrinthian and dry tome of minutiae, its purpose to lay out in excruciating detail every law of Wardenism and any possible legal loophole within it, from the inheritance of property to land taxation. Now, before I lay down its principles, it's important to remember that Wardenism is largely an anti-theistic faith by nature, and made almost in opposition to a singular or malevolent god figure. However, the First Warden did discuss a being called the one who came before, who, or whatever this being was, the First Warden believed they were the creator of man and the beasts of this earth, using their own blood mixed with the waters of the sea, the soil of the earth, and the clouds in the sky to form them. When they presided over the earth, the world was like a paradise, and a utopian civilization unseen since was watched over with perfect and just law. But at some point, sin entered into the world, which corrupted mankind and everything it touched. To spare humanity, the one who came before split itself in half, body and spirit, and took on this sin, burying it along with their physical body in a prison which became Eris, presumably because the old world had been destroyed by its corruption, that being sin. Most scholars believe this story is metaphorical and merely made as an example of sin and how to save oneself. They must follow the tenets of Wardenism as it is taken from scraps and excerpts from the First Warden's writings, rather than an explicit published writing by him. However, in these same writings, scholars have deducted that the first crime which was brought about by this first schism was treason, which evidently allowed it to flourish in the old world, although this is not further elaborated on. It is likely that whatever malignant being the First Warden saw in their dreams brought forth the idea of this body of sin beneath the earth. Now, Wardenism itself is based on the great principles, the 5 rights and 4 responsibilities. The 5 rights are what the First Warden granted to Wardenite believers, and the 4 responsibilities what he instructed them to uphold. The adherence of these allows for the pillars of virtue, 9 in total, to hold the world together by imprisoning the physical evil of first sin and allowing humanity to survive. Though these principles have variation among the modern Wardenite sects, each accepts all 9, for to reject even one is to become radical or heretical to the worst degree. The first of these principles, the 5 rights, are as follows. 1. The right of trial, which states that Wardenites shall not be deprived of any of their lights without due consideration of a judge using the law of the First Warden. This is the first and most fundamental bedrock of the Wardenite culture and faith. 2. Right of transit, which allows for those who live peacefully and by the law to travel and roam freely within the collective Wardenite state. 3. Right of body, which affirms that those living peacefully and by the law shall not be assaulted or wounded by another, and that this right shall be protected by the law and force of arms when necessary. Right to dissent, which allows those living peacefully and by the law to question legal decisions so long as it is done in both proper setting and order. This is one of the most contentious beliefs in Wardenite faith, as the line between adherence and radicalism is often widely debated. And 5. The right of peace, which promises that those living peacefully and by the law shall not have their property attacked or seized by the government. This law too has been interpreted widely, as according to Wardenites' own wartime principles, many judges have deemed that property may be seized legally during times of war so long as restitution is paid, although often this restitution simply means protecting the previous owner from the enemy army. This also raises the question of land ownership in the case of tenant farmers, who some view, by virtue of providing goods on a land whose owner is taxed, are technically having their goods seized without proper restitution, although this is usually just brushed under the rug by most judges. The second of these great principles are the 4 responsibilities, and they are 1. The responsibility of unity, which states that it is every Wardenite's duty to act with unity with the followers of the First Warden's law. This is really a responsibility only for the rich, as the poor don't have much say in what their liege lord decides to go to war for. Likewise, those wars are often just playgrounds for judges and jurists to declare their adversaries in violation of this responsibility and heretical. 2. The responsibility of lawfulness, where each Wardenite is to maintain perfect adherence to the law in public and private. 3. The responsibility of solidarity, which is to act with the well-being and virtue of other Wardenites in mind, to do right by others, so to speak. And 4. The responsibility of establishment, which ensures that the First Warden's laws flourish and are administered to maintain the pillars of virtue. This has been, as one can probably imagine, co-opted by various warlike Wardenite sects to justify their expansive wars of religious conquest, though in reality this responsibility merely requires Wardenism to have a stable foundation to administer its laws, not subject the world to them. So these are the great principles in Wardenism's basic fundamental truths. Even though there are other facets to the Wardenite faith, because naturally it has evolved over its nearly 1,000-year struggle with ritualism and has developed various tenets and sects, as I mentioned. But for our purposes, this suffices. We've still got an uprising to get to, but before I touch on that, I need to discuss Wardenite war laws briefly. In essence, Wardenite leaders in times of war are authorized absolute power to include torture and execution of adversaries and even suspected Wardenites. These were likely brought about due to the limited legal framework of the early faith's doctrine. However, some modern sects still hold these principles and liberties as truth, and that the soon-to-be-discussed Great Uprising has not in fact ended, and will not end until all of Ceridon, and in some cases the world, are under Wardenite rule. The birth of Wardenism and subsequent conflicts is generally considered by scholars to be the era of insurrection, or rather to begin that era, the first age of Wardenism, in which they battle for supremacy over Ceridon to carve out a land which they can rule under the First Warden's laws. Now, I know I've thrown a lot at you just now, laws, principles, and responsibilities. It's a lot, I understand, but to understand the coming conflict and the major one it would birth, we needed to understand the basic tenets of this faith. Although this narrative focuses on the First Warden, I do this in hopes of discussing future figures of this struggle with greater ease. It is also worth noting that the First Warden wrote other books, and that another one I did not mention, the Marginalia, is also a core belief of the faithful, but not necessary for this telling. Anyway, back to Arrakis. Although it could be Arrakis, I'm actually not sure. Don't yell at me. It is unclear why exactly Arrakis decided to free the First Warden from prison, but most suspect he believed the First Warden would unearth his wealth and attempt to flee the eastern island for mainland Ceridon, to which he would seize and capture said wealth. This is of course not what happened, because in 296 IS, after spreading his beliefs and acquiring many followers following his imprisonment, the First Warden became a military and spiritual leader of an event known as the Great Uprising. Though initially this was against the tyrannical rule of the warlord Arrakis, who died after 5 years of fighting with the growing Wardenite faithful in 302 IS, this dissatisfaction quickly turned its gaze to ritualism itself and became the catalyst for a near millennia-spanning conflict, known today as the War in Heaven. For our purposes, we will focus on the remainder of the First Warden's importance in this conflict and introduce both the concept of the Mamur and a man named Usun Bishabelik, who, although initially a ritualist adversary, became an early and important champion of Wardenism in this conflict. While a modern Mamur, or Mamur Amat, is part judge, part general, and part king, at the time of the First Warden they acted more as lieutenants under him and leaders in his army armies during the Great Uprising. Although disputed, historians suggest there were initially 3 of them, and that each were given distinct jurisdiction under the First Warden's laws and guidances, where today this position is consolidated into one who rules both as spiritual and literal leader of the faith. Following the defeat of the warlord Arrakis, the Wardenites spread their revolt to the mainland, where they were held in check and kept mostly to the eastern shores of the continent. A ritualist warlord, as I already said, Usun in particular, was both infamous for the atrocities he committed against them, but also for his ability to battle with and push them back to the point it seemed that he was poised to end the rebellion at its source. But in 302 IS, Usun, to the shock of both Wardenites and his ritualist allies, met with the First Warden and publicly converted to Wardenism shortly afterwards. This not only threw his former allies into chaos, but bolstered the Wardenite cause, whose armies were almost overnight able to secure the east and eventually began incursions further into the whole of Ceridon. Though the rationale behind his conversion is unknown to us, of course, it was with his help that the War in Heaven truly began, as the securing of land with his assistance allowed for Wardenism to take hold and hold large swaths of territory, which they would fiercely defend and fight vigorously to expand in the centuries to come. As for the First Warden, he died of natural causes in 332 IS, sometime in his late 70s or early 80s, and though some within the ritualist camp hoped his death would strike the end for Wardenism, it in fact emboldened the Mamors, the First Warden lieutenants I mentioned a little while ago, who continued their campaign across Ceridon in his name for years to come. Alright, now obviously this is not the end of the story, at least not Wardenism's story. In fact, it's really the beginning of a broader, much bloodier history, but where the First Warden is concerned, our work is finished. He was a truly wise and strong-willed man who birthed a faith and forged a new people under what I consider to be just and fair laws based around treating each other with utmost respect and fairness. What those who would follow him would do to this faith, or rather their interpretation of this faith, is another matter entirely, but as for the First Warden, I consider him a noble figure. But that is going to be it for me. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I want to thank Mayor, who is the pretty much chief Wardenite writer for the mod, for assisting me in writing the script. They were very instrumental in checking my facts and making sure that I didn't say anything wrong. If you like Godherja, obviously play the mod. Check them out on the Discord. Check them out on the Patreon. They're great people. They're very, very helpful if you have any questions. If you like this channel, if you like this content, you can consider becoming a channel member. I have 2 member tiers, and these are our members. I want to thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate you very, very much. If you like this video, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, as it lets me and YouTube know that you like this sort of content and you'd like to see more of it. I know you guys love Godherja, so I don't feel like I have to say this, but if you're new, if you just stumbled in here, maybe consider doing so. And that's it. I'm Soul. This has been the First Warden, the dawn of Wardenism, and a millennia of war, and I will happily see you in the next one.